Thanks for checking out another edition here of Octagon Outlook. I am your host, James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching. I got a special guest co-host joining us here. Last week it was James Krause. This week, UFC Bantamweight Cody Stamann joining us here on the program to get us through the next hour or so. Cody, how's it going? Live from Extreme Couture. How you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. I really appreciate you stepping up to the plate and doing this. We got a lot to talk about today. We got the UFC card on Saturday, UFC Fight Island 4. We've got UFC Fight Island 5. I'm sure you're going to be paying attention to that main event coming up here on Saturday. But before we get into that, want to remind our audience to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button here on the Line Movement channel. We do the show every week, Octagon Outlook at 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. And you can find all my really great interviews here on this channel as well. Talked to Walt Harris on Friday, talked to Colby Covington last week as well. So definitely don't want to miss any of those. So hit that subscribe button if you can. As I always tell people, check out blitzbet.eu, especially if you're in Canada. That's the odds we're going to be referencing here today on the program. But let's start with UFC Fight Island 4. Pretty awesome card for a card that on paper didn't look that great, but the main event really delivered. Holly Holm, just a vintage performance, getting that decision victory over Irene Aldana. Cody, your thoughts on the performance? You know, Holly was favored in this fight going in, but I don't think people expected this much of a one-sided performance. What were your thoughts on her win on Saturday?
I think it was right that she was a favorite. You know, Holly's been competing at absolutely the highest level in MMA for a really, really long time, and there's something to say about that experience. You know, when you're used to going against the number 1, 2, 3, 4 girls in the world, and you do that over a period of time. You know, it's hard to be the new person and come in and fight well against someone with that much in cage high level experience. So, you know, I think Holly Holmes just proved that she's one of the absolute best in the world this weekend, and I'm really not surprised.
And also, you know, I think a lot was made heading into this fight of Aldana's win heading into this with the knockout over Caitlyn Vieira. There were people on my timeline saying she's going to knock out Holly. I was like, no, I don't think that's going to happen. We're talking about a former pro boxer in Holly Holm. I felt like in some ways Holm was overlooked a little bit going into this fight because you look at some of the losses she's had. You say, hey, is it time? Is she past her prime? But clearly not. And you got to look at who she's fought. I mean, this is like a killer's row in terms of a resume. Misha Tate, Valentina Shevchenko, Jareen Durandamy in a fight which I thought she actually won. Chris Cyborg at featherweight. You had Amanda Nunes. Like, I just think a lot of people aren't looking at who she's fighting. And conversely for Vieira, or for Aldana, I should say, her best win is probably Caitlyn Vieira as well. So I think the level of competition played into this as well. And I just think the fact that Holly is still getting it done at her age, you're not supposed to talk about a woman's age, but we will here today, Cody, because obviously it has not been a factor for Holly Holm. She solidified, in my opinion, the fact that she is still a top bantamweight in the women's division. I guess in terms of what's next, I mean, I'll kind of get to that after this because we have another fight we got to talk about in the women's bantamweight division, but still great win there for Holly Holm. Let's slide over now to the co-main event. We had Carlos Felipe getting the win over Jorgen de Castro. I don't know how much you saw of de Castro, who I know spent a little bit of time at Extreme Couture, but he was the favorite heading into this fight, and he did not live up to the expectations. Felipe taking the fight. I thought the referee really got too involved in this fight. Curious to get your thoughts on that. But what did you think of Felipe pulling out the win here, who was an underdog heading into the fight?
I'd never seen him before, so I really had no expectations of what he was going to do. And obviously, it's always a nice surprise when you see someone come in and has technique like that and is really willing to get in there and trade. So this is obviously a fun fight. You're talking about two guys that it doesn't take a whole lot to put somebody down, and they're mixing it up like that. As far as the referees, I feel like this has been happening constantly in MMA. Referees are they're trying to make themselves the star of the show, and literally their only job is to keep us safe, right? When we tap and to remind us the rules when we're in positions like where you might want to grab the fence, don't grab the fence, things like that. And outside of that, the referee isn't supposed to be there. You're not even supposed to know he's in the cage with you. I mean, that's a good referee. When the fight's over and all of a sudden this guy's in the cage and you're like, where have you been the last 15 minutes? And you know what I mean? He's just been out of the way, and he was basically spectating from a really, really good vantage point, making sure everything is kosher. I mean, and now you've got referees, standing guys up, and they don't understand the position. Some guy fights for a position, and then he locks up for a second. He's there for 5 seconds, and the referee stands him up. It's like, do you know how much energy and time and how much that would change the trajectory of the fight when you stand someone up and they're in a dominant position? Well, yeah, I'm not thrilled with the referee's new fame, their new fame. They're becoming the star of the show, and that's not how it's supposed to be.
And it bothers me too that there's no repercussions for this type of behavior, right? Like we had a couple weeks ago with the whole Ed Herman and Mike Rodriguez situation where
that knee.
the referee, exactly. And so the referee missed something, but there's no follow-up from that. And we're talking about a guy in Mike Rodriguez who now has another loss when realistically, I think a lot of people felt this should have been a win for him. Do you feel like the UFC's got to step in and put pressure on these athletic commissions and saying, look, you made a mistake. We got to fix this so this doesn't happen again. It seems like there's no talk of that, even after a big fight week like we had on Saturday.
Maybe some kind of suspension period, definitely. But I think having a second referee outside the cage with the ability to call an instant replay, I think is an obvious thing that we just haven't gravitated to yet. Why is there not somebody on the outside? You know what I mean? Why doesn't someone, what does that take away from the actual fight? You know what I mean? If there was another referee watching the fight and he could go back and watch that very clip and go, hey, actually that was a clean shot. Like the fight's over, and that person could come in the same way it happens in the NFL. In the NFL, you wouldn't have one referee, right? Whenever something happens, a group of guys come together, they talk it out. They're talking through the rules on what happened. And then the head ref comes and says, this is the decision that we've made. And I just feel like this is an obvious thing. And same with the judging. Why do we have 3 judges? This isn't boxing. There's multiple sports inside of MMA. There should be more judges. There should be another referee on the outside. I think that's got to be the obvious evolution of MMA. I mean, because this is something that could potentially really, really injure our sport if we don't nip it in the butt soon.
I completely agree with that. Let's move along to the other fight I was referencing, the other women's bantamweight fight. We had Irene Aldana taking on Juliana Pena, and it is GDR getting the submission win. Some crazy odds on that. I think it was something like plus 2,600 or something. Duranami does not submit her opponents, but she had a really great win in this. And it's funny because I know heading into the fight, I picked Duranami in this fight, but a lot of people were like, what are you doing? Like Pena's going to take her down, out wrestle her. I think GDR is one of the most underrated, fighters in the sport right now. A lot of people don't give her respect. Of course, there's a whole situation with her beating Holly Holm. People felt like she didn't win, and then obviously not wanting to fight Cyborg. So there's a bit of hate there, but I thought this was a vintage performance from her as well. And I think this has to set up her and Holly Holm, the rematch at this point. Just first, your thoughts on the fight, and what do you think is next?
I've always been impressed with her kickboxing ability and her overall just understanding of the game. I also picked her to win. So I definitely think an obvious rematch with Holly Holmes, or she just goes and fights for the title. I definitely think that she's definitely one of the best women in that division, and probably the only one that we haven't really seen at the tippy top. Obviously that was her choice, but maybe she's changed her mind by now, and I think it'd make for a great story too. It'd be pretty easy to build that fight, being that she said she absolutely was not going to fight, and then if she goes and she actually takes the fight, that'd be amazing, and there'd be a cool story behind it too.
Well, just for some clarification, so Duranami actually lost her last fight prior to this against Amanda Nunes for the title. It was a rematch, but that fight against Holm was at 45, so I think you could do the rematch at 35, see what happens there, and sort of figure it out. I do have some ideas about what could be next for the bantamweight title. Of course, Nunes defending her featherweight title coming up here in December against Megan Anderson, so a bit of time to figure things out at 135, but certainly a very big win for Duranami. Juliana Pena, I feel like, Cody, this was someone who had so much expectation after winning the Ultimate Fighter. She hasn't lost much. I think her only other loss in the UFC was to Valentina Shevchenko. She did have some time off, obviously becoming a mother. But where does she go from here? Because it seems like she gets to that level where, you think she's going to fight for a title, and then she ends up coming up short. What do you think is next for her?
I think she needs to definitely head back in the rankings and maybe fight someone in the 10 to 15 range. After a time off like that, and then you're going and fighting one of the best in the world, I don't think that was the smartest move by her management. I think that they definitely should have maybe given her, one fight in between that would have made a lot more sense. But she is super talented. She's super talented. And, I think that she'd be a household name in MMA if she was more consistent, if she was fighting 2-3 times a year. But
yeah. Totally agree with that. I think consistency
is
the issue. Yeah, you're right. She's got to fight more and get those reps in, because when we're not fighting that much, it's very tough to keep up with the rest of the division, I would imagine. Just a guy from behind a keyboard here talking, but what do you think of that? Obviously consistency, right?
It's all about consistency. I mean, literally injuries happening, things happen. I mean, there's a million things that can take you out of the sport, right? You have to be healthy mentally and physically to do this. And the people that can and are, those people tend to move up a lot faster, and they stay more relevant, and they build. And it's like every time you're out of the spotlight, you need to think that there's other people that are filling that space constantly, because the MMA machine does not stop for anyone. It doesn't care if you're hurt, it doesn't care if you're the champ, doesn't care who you are, how big your name is. When the light's not shining on you, it's shining on someone else, and that's just the reality of the sport that we're involved in.
All right, we got 2 more fights in the main card we're going to go through here quickly. Kyler Phillips getting just a brutal TKO elbows from Mount, the TKO win over Cameron Else, the newcomer. Just a great performance here from Kyler Phillips, who's, I think this type of win really, puts the division kind of knowing who this guy is, that he is quite talented. What do you think of his performance, especially since it's in your weight class?
Oh, he's a tough kid. He's definitely a tough kid. To me, I think his biggest downside is that he's not very big. He doesn't look very big to me. He looks like he's walking around at 145 pounds, and against the top guys in the division, he's going to have a significant size disadvantage. But he's obviously talented. He's got the skills. He's got everything that it takes to win and succeed in MMA. I just think that he's a 25 pounder. Really, I mean, I look at him and I see a 25 pounder that's competing at 135, and that's tough. That's tough because he's super talented. He's obviously a finisher. He's not scared to go out there and get a fight. But I think he should move to 25.
Interesting. I like that move for sure. Well, I guess if he keeps winning, you might as well stay in the weight class. And then maybe when you get that loss, you look at other options there. And then, of course, opening up the main card, a fight I'm sure you watched just because he's a Michigan guy. We had Daquan Townsend taking on a newcomer in Dusko Todorovic. Todorovic, of course, winning on Contender Series a year ago, defeating a fellow Canadian here in Teddy Ash. But Dusko looked good in this one, got the job done. Unfortunately, Townsend now winless in the UFC. This is probably it for him. But I thought a pretty good performance for Dusko, especially coming in with the layoff. What did you think of the fight?
It's always hard to see a friend go in and out like that. But obviously this division is evolving, and there's guys coming out of the woodwork, and I never heard of him. I didn't see him like Contenders. I'd never seen him. I thought this was a really, really good fight for Daquan, and then, these guys keep getting better. Even at the higher weights, they're getting better. I mean, I feel like they're starting to look more like 55 pounders now, right? It's amazing. And you got to think that there's a whole batch of people all the way around the world, just like the guy that fought Daquan, that, are kind of relatively unknown, that are going to come up and who knows, it completely change the face of the sport, I would imagine. I mean, that was an absolute shock to me. I never heard the kid. I assumed that, Daquan was going to, get his first UFC win, but unfortunately that wasn't what happened.
Yeah, I thought it was a good setup for Daquan, actually, because he had way more experience. I believe he had a height and reach advantage in the fight, too. So I thought there could have been a chance here. I didn't pick him, but I thought, if you're looking at this from a betting perspective, I think Daquan did have some value. Obviously, it didn't happen, but hey, not everyone's going to pick the fights right in terms of that. Let's go to the prelims. The few things I want to talk about, and we'll definitely get to this Fight Island 5 card. But Carlos Condit, how about this? First win since May of 2015. It was great to see Carlos get back on the winning track here against a really tough guy in Court McGee. I actually picked Condit heading into the fight. I felt a lot of people were kind of overlooking who he was fighting, because he lost to Chiesa and Alex Oliveira, and he was losing to Robbie Lawler, like really good fighters. It wasn't like he was losing to guys that were, sort of newcomers here. And I felt like there was a spot here where he could defeat Court McGee, who also had a bit of a layoff heading into this fight, hadn't fought in over a year. But what did you think of Carlos? This was kind of the, MMA fans, it's tough for them to agree on things, but I think everyone sort of agreed. It was nice to see Carlos Condit get a win on Saturday.
Yeah, obviously really nice. Carlos Condit, he's been around forever, since WEC. I've been watching him since I was 18 probably. And, surprisingly, he looked like he did 10 years ago. You know what I mean? Exact same kind of awkward style. He fights guys that don't move a lot really, really well. So if you're a stationary guy, Carlos Condit has a huge advantage. I knew this going into this fight. Just having watched him over the years, if you can't move your feet a lot, Carlos Condit's going to give you a lot of problems because he hits a lot of weird angles. And, I thought it was a really impressive win. And then Court McGee's nose just, oh my God. Geez, that's terrifying. That makes me not even want to be a fighter.
I think there's I think there's a couple cool matchups you could do going forward. I don't know what Nick Diaz is talking about a comeback. That rematch would be fun. How about Robbie Lawler rematch? I mean, there's so many options here for Carlos. I don't want to see him fight prospects. We know Carlos is not going to go back and fight for a title after this performance. I mean, good win, but let's be realistic here. Let's put him in a couple fun fights and let's let him ride off into the sunset. I think that's sort of the best method for Carlos. And same thing with Court McGee. I mean, Court's his story outside the cage is just unbelievable. And I'd like to see him. I'd like to see him get a couple more fights as well here too. But we'll sort of see what happens. Two other things I wanted to talk about quickly, and we'll get on to the next card. This Cooley, I'm always butchering this guy's last name. The featherweight fight, Charles Jourdain and Cooley Labo, the fight that ended up in a draw. I thought Jourdain won this fight, and Canadian bias aside, I thought he did enough to get it done. But what did you think of this fight? Because Jourdain was, I think, the biggest favorite on the card, and it certainly didn't look like it in this fight. It was a very competitive matchup.
Actually, I didn't watch this fight. I did watch the highlights though, and Jourdain, I feel like he's one of those guys that it could very easily be a draw with him a lot because he just does enough. He's like one of those guys that like you hit him, he hits you, maybe hits you a little harder, maybe backs you up. He just barely does enough to win. And when I saw the odds on that fight, I was a little bit confused because he really is one of those guys that kind of goes tit for tat with everyone. He just does enough every round to win. And I think he fought my good friend TJ Laramie. I think TJ beat him.
He did. I was at that fight, Bell Center, Montreal, 2017, and TJ just out wrestled him for 5 rounds. It was that was in the main event too. So that was a cool fight back then. And then the other fight I wanted to mention, not sure if you caught it, Casey Kenny. My God, what a beatdown he put on Andelang in that fight. Just unbelievable performance from him. And another guy that's in your division. I thought that was a really dominant win on the prelims. Did you happen to catch that one?
Yeah, Kenny's tough, man. He's got that left body kick. He mixes it up well. I really like Casey Kenny's style. I've actually been watching him a lot because I'm fighting Moraes, and he also fought Moraes. So I've been watching. I really like the way he puts things together, and he's another threat. God, the bantamweight division is just insane. It's like just when you think that like it can't get any worse, you see guys like Casey Kenny and Tyler Phillips go out and have just unbelievable performances, and you're like, dude, it's top to bottom. Everyone at this division is really, really tough. I mean, everyone's scary. So, God, you got to stay in the gym.
Okay, before we move on to Fight Island 5, UFC Fight Island 5, I wanted to quickly talk about the women's bantamweight division. Okay, there was 2 big fights on this card, like we mentioned, Holly Holm and Jermaine Durandamy winning. I think that's the fight you do next. The winner of that can go on to fight for a title. But I think in the interim, if Amanda Nunes is looking for an opponent at bantamweight, it is Caitlyn Vieira. Now, look, I'm going to get a lot of flack for this because obviously Vieira did not have a great performance in her win over Sijara Eubanks. But let's not forget that last December, had Vieira defeated Irene Aldana, she would have ended up getting the title shot against Nunes. That was the plan, but Aldana spoiling those plans, knocking out Vieira in that fight at UFC 245. And I think people forgot that that's a position Vieira was in heading into that because she still has a great record here. So I think this is how you solve the women's bantamweight problem because a lot of people are trying to figure it out. I know some people said, give it to Holm. She's only got a couple more fights left, or give it to Durandamy. But we saw both those fights last year. I don't think there's a rush to see in the case of Nunes and Durandamy. I mean, that would be a trilogy fight. With Holm, it would be a rematch, but they just fought last July. So I'm not in a rush to see either of those rematches. I think Caitlyn Vieira is the one you should give the next title shot to. And I know I'm going to get some flack for this, but I think, you got to look at wins and losses. Yes, it was an impressive performance against Sijara Eubanks, like I mentioned, but you have to look at her record overall. She has some good wins, and beating someone in Sijara Eubanks who had fought 2 weeks before, had a ton of momentum. I thought that was a pretty good win there. So quickly, Cody, your thoughts on that? I don't know if you've seen Vieira fight, but if you remember, she got knocked out last year and then obviously beat Sijara a few weeks ago. Your thoughts on that?
So Caitlyn Vieira, if I'm her, I want a little more time. I want a couple more fights before I fight for the title because you don't want to be in position the same way Holly Holmes and Durandamy are, just because like you said, it's nobody wants to continuously see these same rematches at the top. You know what I mean? Like, okay, these are the girls at the top. You got this girl coming in. I think that if I'm her manager, I want her to fight Holly Holmes or Durandamy, one of those two, and then she fights for the title. But if you're the UFC, if you're a UFC matchmaker, I 100% agree with you. That makes absolute perfect sense. Those are 2 huge fights. They're easily marketable. Yeah, I mean, that absolutely solves all the problems except for Vieira's problem, where it's like maybe she's probably not ready for that level. I'd like to see her get one more fight with someone at a high level before she fights for the title, just because I want it to be competitive. I want it to be as competitive as possible. I think if she goes into that fight right now, she's going to be a huge underdog. Well, she might either way, though.
Well, yeah, anyone's facing Amanda Nunes is probably going to be an underdog. But no, I like you disagreeing with me here. That's why we got you on here. I got to have some pushback on some of my opinions. But let's get to UFC Fight Island 6. We're just going to talk about the one fight on the prelims. There's a ton of fights on this card. There's 13 fights. This is a fight we actually talked about last week, but I'll get your perspective on this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but we got Tom Breeze taking on KB Buller, the Canadian. Now, KB Buller, a teammate of Tanner Boser and Teddy Ash, and an undefeated middleweight prospect out of Alberta, out of Edmonton, actually. So really excited about his debut. He was supposed to fight on Contender Series against Bruno Oliveira. He gets the UFC call up instead. And if you're on Blitzbet right now, you'll see that Tom Breeze is the favorite at -263, KB Buller at +210. So where I stand on this, and I'll get your thoughts, Cody, if you're not familiar, we can skip this, but I'm interested in this because Tom Breeze has all the potential in the world. This is a guy for years we heard about being, sort of the next, hot prospect in the middleweight division, but it just hasn't unfolded that way. Breeze has had some, very public, mental health issues. He had that actually, he was supposed to fight Olawale Bamboos a few years ago and actually had to pull out of the fight at the last minute. I actually think it was the day of the fight. He ended up pulling out due to anxiety. So, I wish him the best. I hope he can get it together because I think on paper, Tom Breeze is an extremely talented fighter, but it's just a matter of if he can put it in the cage together. And then this last fight, a fight that I believe he was favored, or at least people thought he was going to win that one. He ended up losing in the first round to Brendan Allen. Now, Brendan Allen's quite the talent, but still Tom Breeze, that's a fight that should have been a little bit more competitive in my opinion. So, Breeze has the experience. On paper, he should win this fight, but I think Buller has an opportunity to pull off the upset as well, just because he's undefeated, coming off a really nice win over Matt Dwyer in his last fight, the UFC vet, ended up winning a decision in that one. Buller's got good training partners. Buller's done the walk before to the UFC, by the way, too. I know that's important. He's done that with Tanner Boser. So I think Buller has, at underdog money, I think there's some value there. But do you know anything about either of these guys, Cody? As far as the middle
I know Tom Breeze. I don't know Buller, but the way you're describing him sounds like he has high-level training partners. You say he's undefeated. He's fought guys that have fought in the UFC. I mean, all those are indications that he's obviously got what it takes to compete here. And then you have Tom Breeze, a guy who struggles with anxiety and pressure, and it's different in the UFC. It's very, very, very different in the UFC in comparison to anywhere else, just because when you get in that cage, everyone is watching, and it's a different feeling, and there's a tremendous weight that's on you. And most fighters don't talk about it because everybody wants to act like this stuff doesn't get to them, but it gets to everyone I've ever talked to. The pressure gets to you. It gets to you, and it's about how you manage it and how you find ways of dealing with it. It sounds like Tom Breeze maybe is dealing with it or maybe isn't dealing with it. So, if I'm gonna bet and I'm looking at this, and I would say the Canadian kid, has a pretty good chance. If Tom hasn't dealt with this anxiety situation.
And not just that, I mean, the expectations for Breeze are that, still that he is this, this prospect that just hasn't fought a lot, and we still need to see what he's made of. Whereas Buller, there's really no expectations. He thought he was fighting on Contender Series. He thought he was Exactly. And that's a dangerous thing. And we've seen that before. I always bring up the Alex Hernandez and the Beneil Dariush fight. I mean, Dariush was a ranked guy at the time. Hernandez had just come into the UFC on short notice. He went in there and he knocked him out. I mean, we've seen Dariush knocked out before, but it's that feeling of knowing you're sort of, you got nothing to lose. And Hernandez took advantage of that. That could happen here with Buller, but that's all I'm saying. I'm going to be picking Tom Breeze in this fight. I have to on paper, but if you're looking to bet this, KB Buller might have some value as the underdog. All right, let's get to the main card of this guy I know you're familiar with, Cody. We've got Yusuf Zalal taking on a newcomer in Ilya Tupuna. And right now on Blitzbet, if you look at the odds right now, we've got Yusuf Zalal as actually, we don't have odds for this yet, but I know in a lot of books they have Zalal as the favorite. Understandably, this is going to be his fourth fight this year. Yusuf Zalal trying to be the Cowboy Cerrone of I guess, Factory X with that fourth fight. But, a lot of experience and a lot of momentum, too. The opponent he's fighting, Tupura, I've heard a lot of good things about him. He's 8-0. I do wonder, though, the level of competition. The guy he fought to get in the UFC was 6-2, but a couple of the fights before that, he fought a guy who was just making his pro debut. He's got some decent competition on the regional scene, but just just 8 fights, whereas Zalal's got 12, but some of them have been in the UFC this year. Height and reach wise, I think they're pretty similar. I think if you look here, Tapuga is 5'7", whereas Zalal is 5'10", so a little bit of a height and reach advantage there. But what can you tell us about Yusuf Zalal, Cody? Because I know you spent a little bit of time at Factory X before.
He's a crafty guy. He's a really, really, really crafty guy. Really, he's a stud on his feet. He moves well. He's actually got pretty good submissions, decent wrestling defense. All around, he's a solid guy. I mean, I knew him and Brandon Royval were both going to be in UFC when I went there and trained. It was just a matter of time. 4 fights is a lot. It's not that he's not fighting, great high level competition and getting in these crazy wars. He's pretty much dusting everyone that he's fought thus far. But it's a lot. It kind of starts to wear on your body, and I just wonder if he's kind of been here, and now he's hitting the end of the year, and he's been continuously in training camps. Your body kind of starts to take a dip, and you mostly don't even realize it. But you start to overtrain, and things start falling apart. And you said this guy is 8-0. I've actually never heard of him, but
fought for Brave, fought for Cage Warriors. So he has fought in some good promotions here. Actually, the guy he beat, Steven Goncalves, was 6-2, like I mentioned. So it's interesting here. For most of the books I've seen, it is pretty close. I think I've seen Yusuf just close to almost a 2-1, but like a -175 in a lot of books. So it's interesting to see sort of the mindset. But you do bring up a good point of being burnt out. But I do got to ask, he's 24. It's his metabolism's going fast. Like he doesn't. He's even thinking of 35 at one point. I know because he doesn't cut a lot of weight. So it's not like the weight cut's going to be an issue here, but I'm very interested in this fight. I think it's going to be, I'm going to pick Zalal. I have to, just based off UFC experience, based off momentum, but this Tupuria guy, obviously a lot of hype coming in. So we'll see. It's kind of like the last fight too, in a way.
Yeah. Safe money's on Yusuf. I mean, and if I didn't know the guy he was fighting, I would guess Yusuf would win just based on, what I've seen him do in the gym.
All right, now a fight that's a little bit more clear-cut in the heavyweight division. We've got Tom Aspinall, who's now fighting a new opponent here. I'm just trying to find the odds. Tom Aspinall fighting on Alain Badeau. I believe that's how you say it. He's French. I've living in Canada, obviously Quebec. We kind of know how to pronounce those names. I think it's Badeau, but we'll see what happens. But it was supposed to be Sergey Spivak, so Badeau steps in. But Badeau hasn't fought in a while, and Aspinall is actually the biggest betting favorite on this card right now. Looking on BlitzBet, he is -435, which is a little crazy for a guy who's only got one UFC fight, but we'll get to that in a second here. But Badeau, 32 years old, 6'4", has not fought since he defeated another Canadian here in Todd Stout back at TKO 47 in April of 2019. So a long layoff heading into this one. Not great competition though overall. Todd Stout had a 9-4 record when he fought him, but the guy before that was 0-2. Fought a guy who was 6-11, 0-0, 4-3. You kind of get where I'm going with this. Not great competition here. Obviously, they needed someone to fill in on short notice. You get that. Aspinall, we should mention, is going to have a height and reach advantage in this fight. He's also 27. He's 6'5" with a 78-inch reach. So he's going to have a height and reach advantage here. Now, he beat a guy in his last fight in Jake Collier, who, let's be honest, I mean, Jake had a layoff coming into that one. Didn't look great. I mean, good win. Nice to go out there and win in 45 seconds, but let's not pretend that he was fighting a world beater either. So kind of my thoughts on this, and I'll get yours in a second here, Cody, is that I think Aspinall will win. I would not bet -435 on a guy who's got one UFC fight over a guy who's supposed to beat in his debut. I would look at maybe the inside the distance prop or something along there. But Aspinall, this kind of looks like a fight. It's basically his fight to lose, in my opinion. Now, what are your thoughts on this fight?
Yeah, you're in another situation where you're fighting a guy that literally maybe he's coming off the couch and is going to go out there and just give it hell for 1 minute or 2 minutes or whatever he's got in the tank. Who knows what kind of shape this guy's in? Who knows what he's been doing? You know what I mean? He literally could have been working his 9-to-5 job, and he just got a phone call because they needed someone. You know what I mean? Like who knows the backstory? And like Aspinall, one fight. That's 435 is a lot, especially at heavyweight. Heavyweight fights always scare me, you know what I mean? Especially when the odds are that big, because these are big guys that are wearing 4-ounce gloves. They're like little rocks on their hands, and all it takes is one little shot. You know what I mean? I don't ever think heavyweight fights are safe money, just because one guy can be so much better than the other guy, but he can still get clipped, and it's over just like that. It's not like other weight classes, you know what I mean? Like it's really, really scary at heavyweight in the UFC. So yeah, this is a dangerous fight to bet on.
All right, we're going to zoom through these next two fights because they're not really super notable. We've got a newcomer in Dricus du Plessis taking on Marcus Perez. Now, Marcus Perez, he's been in the UFC for a while, but just struggled with consistency. He's actually coming off a loss to Wellington Turman. Before that, he beat Anthony Hernandez in the second round. Before that, he lost to Andrew Sanchez. Before that, he beat James Blachowicz, and then he lost to Eric Anders as well. Has a win over Ian Heinisch in LFA. That's probably his best win at this point. Was that one where he actually won the LFA middleweight title here, but really struggling with consistency and fighting a guy in Duplessis who's only got one loss. It's to Roberto Sodiq, who's just one of the best fighters outside of the UFC right now. He actually beat Roberto in the fight before that, so you can kind of, they're both at one apiece, but this guy's fought pretty decent competition overall. They're pretty similar physically. I mean, in terms of, the height and reach and all that, not much of a difference here. We don't have odds yet on BlitzBet, but I have seen a lot of books have Duplessis as the favorite. I'm going to go there. I'll take him by decision. It's more a fade on Marcus Perez in this fight more than anything. Do you have anything to contribute here? I don't know if you're familiar with either guy, but Duplessis fought in EFC, which is that pretty notable promotion out in South Africa.
Yeah, just based on the level of competition they're fighting, it sounds like they're probably pretty similar. It sounds like the first guy you mentioned is winning and losing, and like the level of competition, the guys that he's beating aren't matching up with the guys he's losing. I mean, losing to, you know what I mean? Like he goes and beats a guy like Ian Heinisch and then loses to a guy you've never heard of. So this is a guy that, who knows who shows up on fight night. Those are guys that always scare me. They always really, really scare me. Guys that are super inconsistent like that, I tend to stay away from. But yeah, like I said, don't know too much about this fight to make.
I'm kind of the same way. That's why I kind of kept it quick here, just because, I don't know a ton. I mean, I've seen Marcus Perez fight a handful of times with Duplessis. I'll be honest, haven't seen a ton of tape on him. It's more just a fade on Perez, like I mentioned. Let's get to the heavyweight fight. Not going to spend a lot of time on this. Ben Rothwell, Marcin Tybura. Marcin Tybura is just one of those guys that just does not have any notable performances. I think the only notable thing in his UFC career so far is when he got knocked out at UFC Vancouver last year in 59 seconds by Augusto Sakai. A guy, by the way, in Augusto Sakai who doesn't get a lot of wins by stoppage. So not a great loss to have. This was a guy at one point who looked pretty good. He was on a nice winning streak to start off his UFC career, but ended up losing to Verdum. Tybura has actually lost 4 of his last 6 fights, or 7 fights, I should say. It is coming into this on a 2-fight win streak, back-to-back wins over Maxine Grisham and Sergey Spivak. Ben Rothwell, kind of a weird career as well. Lost 3 straight when he fought, lost to Dos Santos, Ivanov, Arlovsky, coming off back-to-back wins over Stefan Struve and Oven St. Preux, which was a heavyweight fight, which is kind of a weird matchup there. I'm going to lean Rothwell here. 38 years old. Obviously, there's a point he's got to start declining a lot, but I think he's got enough here just with the experience. He's 38-12 record compared to Tybura. He's only got 19-6. I think Rothwell wins this in a very lackluster fight, but I'm not expecting much out of both these guys. What are you thinking in this one?
Can I be honest? I'll go get a sandwich or something during this fight. I don't necessarily like the way either one of these guys fight. Technically, neither one of them are brilliant. I feel like it's more of a grit situation. And if you take these guys and you put them in a 155-pound body, they're 0-10 at any weight class. You know what I mean? Other than heavyweight. So it's not really a fight that I'm looking forward to, if I'm being honest.
And quickly, the odds on this, Rothwell is a slight favorite here at -182 on BlitzBet. The comeback on Marcin Tybura is +149. But I would stay away from this fight. Too many question marks, in my opinion. All right, co-main event. 2 fighters I know very well. Edson Barbosa, Makwan Amirkhani. It was supposed to be Edson Barbosa and Sadiq Youssef. Youssef having visa issues, can't go to Abu Dhabi. Insert Makwan Amirkhani, who's actually coming off a pretty impressive win over Danny Henry. He got that submission victory in his last fight. Barbosa coming off a very close fight with a guy that you've trained with a bunch, Cody, in Dan Ige. Barbosa, I thought, looked good in that fight, even though he ended up losing. It was a split decision loss. Some people felt like it could have gone the other way here. Looking on BlitzBet right now, Barbosa, we don't have odds yet, but a lot of the books do have Barbosa as the favorite. Understandable. I'm picking Barbosa in this fight, Cody. I think if this fight stays standing, I think he has a clear edge in the striking. We saw Amirkhani get outstruck later in his fight against Shane Burgos, and I know Burgos and Barbosa are kind of similar in terms of their stand-up. I know Barbosa is more of like a Muay Thai guy, but still very dangerous if this fight does stay on the feet. Now, look, if Amirkhani can get this to the ground, it'll be very interesting because obviously that's his bread and butter, is those, the guillotine choke. But I think there's one guy who's done it in the last couple of years, and that was Tony Ferguson. But Barbosa's a pretty savvy guy. I don't see him getting taken down in this fight. I think he keeps this fight standing, and he either wins the decision or gets a second or third round knockout in this fight. Because I think Barbosa knows he can't let this go to the judges' scorecard again. That last fight, too close for comfort. It didn't go his way. I think he tries to get the finish here, especially in a guy in Amir Khani who, like I said, when he does try and stand up, he ends up having pretty close fights. A lot of those wins he's had by decision were by split. So I'm going Barbosa in this one. Who are you going with?
I'm also going to go Barbosa. I think that if you're Kami, the best thing you can do is put Barbosa on the cage. If you're watching the Khabib fight and the Dan Ige fight, Edson Barbosa doesn't fight well off the cage, and he doesn't defend takedowns well off the cage. In the open mat, he's really, really good at defending takedowns. So if you find Edson Barbosa in the middle of the cage most of this fight, I think it's obvious Edson Barbosa wins. I think he's a lot better on his feet. He hits hard. His timing is great. He's a nasty guy to fight. I mean, because everything he's throwing at you has the worst intentions. He's trying to kill you in there. So Edson Barbosa's a guy that absolutely scares the shit out of me. But I definitely think he has more ways to win. But also Mac Murakami is really, really good at just being a pressure fighter, being one of those guys that's kind of in your face and throws you off your game, and he's pretty tough on top. You saw him do it to Ige. I've seen him do it to a few other people. But if you look at Dan Ige's fight against both these guys, I think Edson Barbosa was a lot better fight for Dan than I messed his name up.
That's okay. It's Mr. Finland. That's what they call him.
Mirakami. I mess his name up every time I say it.
Either way, we're both on Barbosa in this fight, so we'll go there. Now, let's talk about the main event. I really want to get your thoughts on this because these are two guys in your division and two potential future opponents here in Marlon Moraes and Corey Sandhagen. And if we look right now on BlitzBet, we've got Marlon Moraes as the underdog at plus 118, Corey Sandhagen minus 145. That's been pretty consistent about all the books I've looked, with Sandhagen being the favorite. I'm a little bit surprised by that, only because Sandhagen's coming off that pretty devastating loss to Aljamain Sterling, where he was submitted in the first round, whereas Moraes, got the win over Aldo. I know a lot of people felt that was maybe a fight that should have gone Aldo's way, but still, I mean, Aldo's a former champion. That's a pretty good win on the resume there. I broke this fight down at length a couple weeks ago, talked about it this morning on my podcast. I'll give you kind of my simplistic version here, and then I really want to get your thoughts on this. But I think this fight ends one of two ways. Either Moraes is going to knock him out. We really haven't seen Sandhagen, tested against like a power puncher, so to speak. I think the closest fight to that, it was the John Lineker fight, but Lineker packed more punch, I think, at 125 than 135. So a little bit comparable from that sense, but I think Marlon's a much harder hitter than John Lineker is. So that's sort of a comparable fight. But if he can't knock him out, I think this is Sandhagen's fight to lose, because with his height and reach advantage, I'm going to mention this here quickly, Moraes is only 5'6", and he's got a 66.5 inch reach, where Sandhagen 5'11" with a 70 inch reach. So that's a big height and reach advantage for Sandhagen in this fight. If Moraes can't get on the inside, and Sandhagen being an elevation fight team has got that cardio to go 5 rounds if need be, I think that plays in his favor here. And I think if Marlon can't get the finish early on, it's going to end up like the Cejudo fight, where I think Sandhagen's going to be able to take over, having a bit better cardio, and also potentially could finish this fight. I mean, don't put it past Corey Sandhagen from getting a finish here on Marlon Moraes, but I'm going to go Sandhagen in this fight. Now, if you're looking to bet this fight, I almost see this as a coin flip. So there could be some value here on Moraes as the underdog, just because he does pack a punch. He's knocked out most guys in that division already. But Cody, I got to get your pick on this one. My pick's going to be Sandhagen, but I think there's some value there on Moraes. Which way are you going on this one?
I like Marlon in this fight. I just think he's more technically sound. He's more athletic. He's bigger. He's stronger. The reach, obviously, is gonna become a factor. But with the ease that Aljamain Sterling took Corey Sandhagen down, I feel like it kind of exposed him. I mean, Corey Sandhagen hadn't necessarily fought anybody at a super high level, but he was dusting everyone coming up. Fighting John Lineker, you're talking about two completely different sized humans. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You fight John Lineker, and you got a guy that's really good at bouncing in and out, and is really, really slick. John Lineker never touches him. I mean, that's obvious. John Lineker is 5'2". Corey Sandhagen's almost 6 foot. I mean, you're talking about, you know what I mean? These are two completely different sized people. Mm. In my eyes, honestly, I think a lot of people are overlooking Marlon Moraes. I mean, Marlon Moraes could any day be the best guy in this division. He knocked out. They have one common opponent, or maybe more, but Aljamain Sterling.
Yeah, where he finished that fight. Yeah.
Sterling finishes Sandhagen in 30 seconds, and Marlon knocks out Sterling in 30 seconds. So I mean, MMA math doesn't always work that way. Stylistically, things change. You know what I mean? There's a lot of variables that go into saying that, but this guy's been competing at the highest level. So if I'm betting the house on Marlon Moraes to win this fight. I mean, he's been in 5-round fights before. I don't think the conditioning is going to be a factor. I think really what happened with Cejudo was the nerves. And I think that he was landing those shots and Cejudo wasn't blocking him. So he just kept throwing him, and just gassed himself out because Cejudo was essentially doing nothing. He thought he was going to get him out of there. And it was just a rookie mistake. And I think he's probably learned from that. And I'm sure he's a better fighter because of it. Definitely like Marlon Moraes in this fight. I think Corey Sandhagen is one of the slickest dudes to ever put the gloves on. But I just like Marlon Moraes because he's a super technically sound guy. He's really hard to hit, and a lot of things that Sandhagen does well. I don't think it's necessarily going to work on a guy like Moraes because he's always fundamentally in good position. So he's going to be a hard guy to do that tricky stuff too.
Love it. That's why I'm glad I got you on here. What better than get one of the best bantamweights in the division, and Cody breaking down this fight. So really, really appreciate that. Okay, before we go, I did want to talk about this Paulo Costa thing from last week where, they're still going back and forth. He's going back and forth with Israel Adesanya. I don't think his stock could be any lower right now. Like, look, I don't agree with the antics that Israel Adesanya did after that fight last week or 2 weeks ago, I should say, at UFC 253. But come on, man, you lost that fight and he wants a rematch and he's asking for all these things. Look, when you lose decisively, there should be no talk of a rematch unless you were a dominant champion and you can use that clout to potentially get a rematch here. But I don't think anyone outside of Paulo Costa's team wants to see a rematch with him and Israel Adesanya. So if I'm Paulo Costa, I'm putting my focus elsewhere. I need to get a quick win to get back in that spot. There's a lot of big notable fights coming up here. We've got the Jack Hermanson and Darren Till fight. We've got Robert Whittaker and Jared Cannonier. The loser of either of those fights is who Paulo Costa should be looking at, not a rematch with Adesanya here. Stop, man. You're looking terrible. It's not looking good overall when you decisively lose a fight and now you want a rematch. It's just a bad look overall on that. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, Cody. I'm sure you've been paying attention on social media. Paulo Costa putting out these little video clips saying, I want to fight you. I deserve my rematch. Like, come on, dude. We got to live in reality.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing that I think, when a grown man humps you on national TV, I think you get up and you guys get in a fist fight in the cage. I think that should have been what happened. I mean, that's what I kind of expect. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe we just did that. I thought Costa was going to get up and they were going to get in a legit fist fight after that fight, but it didn't happen. Paulo Costa clearly got outclassed. And this is like kind of going back to like the Chito Vera, Sean O'Malley thing. You know what I mean? Sean O'Malley gets kicked in the leg one time. He curls up into a ball and then gets carried out on a stretcher and then tells everyone he's 12-0 and he didn't lose that fight. It's like, dude, you're making yourself look like an asshole. And a wise person once told me that losing reveals character. You know what I mean? When shit is hard and things didn't go your way or something happened that was unexpected, that's where you really, really see someone for their true self. And I think that these guys are really showing their cards, and it's just not a good look. I mean, you realize that, these aren't necessarily the best people. They don't have shit together if they're going out and saying things and making these stupid ass decisions and making themselves look bad. I definitely think Paulo Costa needs to throw his phone away and just get back in the gym. Hopefully he's healthy and he can start training and start training for something else and just move on. You know what I mean? Move on, go beat a bunch of guys and get back to the top and do it that way, rather than trying to do that on social media. Because now he just lost half his fan base with the way he's handled the situation.
Cody, you killed it today as the co-host, man. Really appreciate you taking the time. Our viewers can follow you on. No, it's great. We got to get you back on here, man. I love when you analyze fights. You're one of the best analysts out there, in my opinion. And glad we got to join forces again here today. We got to hit up soon to do that interview before your Merab fight. We'll keep that in mind. But in the meantime, our audience can find you on social media at Cody Stamann. That's where you can find all of the sponsors and everything else. You can check them out. We're actually out of time here today, so we don't have a ton of time. But I do want to let our audience know. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We do the show every week, 1:15 p.m. Eastern time, recapping last week's card, previewing this week's card. And we get a little bit of news in there in between. My name is James Lynch. You can find me on Twitter at Lynch on Sports. And you can find my channel, youtube.com/Lynch on Sports. I want to thank producer Jorgen for always doing a kick-ass job. I want to thank Cody for coming on here. And we will see you guys next week, 1:15 p.m. Eastern time here on Line Movement. Thanks so much for watching.